Sitting in a chair by the window of my new mansion, I watch the last rays of the setting sun color the sky over the tea woodlands in shades of purple and gold. My old hands, mottled with wrinkles and age spots, rest on the arms of a chair that costs more than all my old furniture combined. Sometimes I catch myself thinking that it's all a dream, that tomorrow I'll wake up in my little apartment on the outskirts of town, where I've lived for the last 15 years since Herbert died. I'm 75, and for the first time in years, I feel truly at home. What a strange twist of fate that at an age when most of my female peers have long since resigned themselves to a quiet life surrounded by pictures of children and grandchildren, I have begun a new chapter. The cup of tea in my hands is still warm, and the memories are all too vivid. It seems like yesterday, me, a young 20-year-old girl with a mop of red hair and a scattering of freckles on her nose, meeting Herbert at a university party. He was so handsome in his tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, with those intelligent eyes and his shy smile. An economics professor, 10 years older than me, but when he started talking to me about Blake's poetry, I was lost. We were married a year later, a small ceremony, a modest dress I made myself. My parents were gone by then, my father from a heart attack, my mother from cancer the year after. Herbert became my family, my support, my anchor in the world. Lancelot was born 3 years after we were married. The labor was hard. The doctors said I would never have another child. Herbert and I decided that one child was also happiness, and we put everything into it, our love, our hopes, our dreams. I remember how Lancelot took his first steps in our little garden, how he learned to read sitting on my lap, how he proudly showed us his drawings and crafts. Herbert taught him how to play chess. I taught him how to bake ginger cookies according to my grandmother's recipe. University, majoring in financial analysis, red diploma. Herbert and I were so proud of him. By then, Herbert had already become dean of the economics department, and I was teaching high school literature. We had a good life, modest but dignified. And then Lancelot met Persephone. I vividly remember the day he brought her to our house. Tall, slim, with impeccable makeup and clothes that weren't exactly mass market. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships, and she made it clear from the first moment that she found our home and lifestyle charmingly simple. Herbert later told me, "She'll break his heart." But he was wrong. It was she who broke our hearts. Their wedding was lavish and expensive. Persephone's father paid for everything from the rent on the old mansion to the champagne, which, as she never tired of repeating, came straight from France. I tried to help with the organization, but quickly realized that my participation was not required. Persephone and her mother had already decided everything. The bride's parents gave the newlyweds a down payment on a house in an upscale neighborhood. Herbert and I, a set, which Persephone politely thanked and, I'm sure, never used. 3 grandchildren appeared one after another 2 years apart: Roland, Tristan, and Isolde. Beautiful children with Lancelot's eyes and their mother's haughty expression. I loved them unconditionally as only grandmothers can. At first, Lancelot and Persephone brought them to our house every Sunday. Herbert taught the boys to play checkers. I read Isolde fairy tales. Persephone was usually away on her own business at this time, calling these visits Grandmother's Day. Gradually, the visits became less frequent. Lancelot referred more and more often to his work, Persephone, to the children's clubs and sections. Herbert and I began to visit them ourselves, but we felt that our visits were more of an obligation than a joy. When the children needed a babysitter, we'd get a call. "Verity, you're retired, you have plenty of time, and Lancelot and I are so tired at work." I never said no. I babysat, cooked, cleaned, did laundry while the young parents vacationed or networked. When Herbert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Lancelot visited him in the hospital twice, Persephone not once. The kids might get scared. I spent the last months between home and the hospital, torn between caring for my husband and the grandchildren, who still had to be taken because Persephone had an important appointment and Lancelot can't take the day off. Herbert left quietly, in his sleep, holding my hand. At the funeral, Lancelot stood stone-faced, responding one-wordedly to condolences from his father's co-workers. Persephone ostentatiously blotted dry eyes with a Chanel handkerchief. The grandchildren were cranky and asked when we were going home. After the funeral, I sold our house. Too many memories, too much Herbert in every corner. Bought a small apartment in a high-rise. Lancelot helped with the move, but was clearly annoyed at having to spend a weekend on it. When I asked if he wanted to take anything as a memento of his father, he shrugged. There's no room for old stuff. We're just renovating. For the first year without Herbert, I existed like a fog. I called Lancelot every Sunday, but the conversations grew shorter and shorter. Often Persephone would pick up the phone and say her husband was busy. Sometimes I could hear his voice in the background. Then there were years when I tried to be helpful, bringing home-cooked meals, buying gifts for the grandchildren, offering to help with the children. Persephone took it all for granted, but she never missed a chance to say, "You, Verity, of course you cook the old-fashioned way. Kids don't eat that nowadays." Or, "We try not to buy toys with small parts. It's dangerous." When Lancelot lost his job during the economic crisis, I gave him all my savings, $40,000 that Herbert and I were saving for our old age. "I'll pay it back, Mom, as soon as I get back on my feet," he said. I replied that it wasn't a loan, but a gift. He found a new job 3 months later, and another 6 months later, he and Persephone bought a new car. He never thought about money again. Each year, I saw my grandchildren less and less. Roland, the eldest, at 14, already looked at me with the same condescending politeness as his mother. Tristan was always engrossed in his phone and answered one-wordedly. Only Isolde, the youngest, sometimes showed genuine interest, asking me about how we lived in the old days. But even she grew up, and her visits became rare and short. My 70th birthday, I met alone. Lancelot called the next day, apologizing. "Sorry, Mom. Got caught up in the moment. Forgot." I said I understood. "Next time, we will definitely celebrate. Bring the children," he promised. But in 71st, and in 72nd, and in 73rd, it was the same. A call the next day, apologies, promises. At 74, I stopped waiting. I started taking art classes at the local community center, joined a book club, volunteered at the library. I got a cat, a ginger mongrel Shakespeare picked up on the street. My life became quiet, measured, and, in general, not bad. Sometimes I called Lancelot more often, wrote letters to my grandchildren. I rarely got any replies. And then the unexpected happened. A letter from a law firm informing me that my great-aunt Brianna, whom we hadn't seen in 30 years, had passed away and left me her entire fortune. At first, I thought it was a mistake or a fraud. Brianna, my mother's sister, was an eccentric person. She went to Europe when she was young, married some aristocrat, then divorced and disappeared from sight. Occasional postcards came from around the world, but I hadn't heard from her in years. I called the law firm in question. Turns out it was true. Brianna had indeed died 6 months ago in Switzerland. Childless and widowed, she had left a will in which my dear niece Verity, the only person in the family with a sense of humor and no prejudice, was the sole heir. The amount of the inheritance made me sit up. $4.5 million, 2 apartments in Europe, and a collection of antiques estimated at 6 figures. I, Verity Sparks, a retired literature teacher, a widow with a modest pension and a cat, was suddenly a millionaire. My first thought was to call Lancelot, share the news. Maybe offer to help with the mortgage he was always complaining about, to pay for his grandchildren's college tuition. I dialed his number, the answering machine, left a message. Lancelot, it's Mom. I have news. Please call me back. He didn't call back that day or the next. 3 days later, I called again. This time, Persephone answered the phone. Verity, Lancelot is very busy right now. He has an important project. Is it something urgent? I said, no, nothing urgent. He'll call back this weekend, she promised. The weekend came and went. There was no call, and that's when I made my decision. For the first time in years, I thought about myself, not my son, not my grandchildren, not how I could be of use to them. I decided to buy a house, not just a house, a mansion, in T Woodlands, the most prestigious neighborhood in the city, where Persephone had always wanted to move, but couldn't afford it, despite Lancelot's good job. The realtor showed me several options, and I fell in love with the last one, a 3-story Georgian-style building with columns, balconies, a winter garden, and a swimming pool. $3 million and it's yours, the realtor said. I nodded without bargaining. I was moving in all alone, except for Shakespeare and a team of movers. New furniture, new paintings, new life. The first night I sat in the empty living room, on the only chair, and thought, what have I done? But in the morning, waking up in the huge bedroom overlooking the garden, I realized I had no regrets. This was my home, my life, my choice. For the first time in decades, I felt like I wasn't someone's mother, grandmother, wife, but simply Verity, a woman entitled to her own happiness. And now I sit here, in my chair by the window, and think of Aunt Brianna, whom I hardly knew, but to whom I owe this new life. I wonder what she would say if she saw me now. Probably raise a glass of champagne and make one of her signature toasts. To new beginnings, dear. It's never too late to start living for yourself. It took me a week to realize that I could actually afford everything I had only dreamed of before. Not save for a rainy day, not save for medical treatment, not help Lancelot with his mortgage, just living the life I want to live. For the first time, I woke up at night with a strange feeling of guilt, like I was doing something wrong, something reprehensible. Shouldn't I, as a mother, think of my son first? My grandchildren? Isn't it natural to give them my money? But then I remembered unanswered calls, forgotten birthdays, Persephone's condescending looks when I brought homemade pies not on the latest health food trends. The last Christmas dinner I was invited to 3 years ago, where I felt like an uninvited guest. The way Isolde would correct me with barely concealed irritation when I mispronounced the name of some trendy band, and I realized, no, I didn't have to. Not after all these years of being remembered only when necessary. I spent almost a month after receiving my inheritance wondering what to do next. The first impulse to call Lancelot, to tell him everything, faded. Instead, I began researching investment options, attending financial literacy seminars for people my age, and consulting with financial advisors. I placed most of my funds in reliable, though not the most lucrative investment portfolios. You won't need it for the rest of your life, I was told by a bank advisor, a man about Lancelot's age, who, unlike my son, patiently explained all the nuances to me and didn't dismiss my outdated views. And then I decided to buy a house, not because I was cramped in my apartment, but simply because I could, because I had lived modestly all my life, saving every dollar, because I damn well deserved it. The process of choosing a house turned out to be fascinating. I spent weeks looking at real estate listings in the T Woodlands. The realtor, a young woman named Paige, showed me relatively modest options at first. Would you be more comfortable with something more compact, Mrs. Sparks? She gently suggested after the second day of viewings. A big house is a lot of maintenance, and at your age, At my age, my dear, I don't want to compromise, I said. Show me the most luxurious houses you have. Her eyes lit up when she realized I was serious. The next day, we toured 3 mansions, one more magnificent than the other. But it was the last one, a 3-story Georgian-style building with columns on the front, that made my heart race. This house was built in 2010 for a famous movie producer, Paige said as we walked through the huge rooms. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a movie room, a wine cellar, an indoor pool, a winter garden, 2 acres, landscaped by the winner of an international exhibition in Chelsea. I listened to her half listening, absorbed by the sense of space, light, beauty that filled the house. High ceilings, huge windows that overlooked the immaculately manicured garden with its fountain, mahogany wood paneling in the library, a marble fireplace in the living room. 3 million? I asked when we finished looking around. 3,200,000, Paige nodded. But I think we can settle for 3. I pictured Persephone's face if she saw this house. Her eternal, we could afford it too, if it weren't for the mortgage payments and the kids and this economy. I'll take it, I said. 3 million. No haggling. The paperwork process took 2 weeks. During that time, I started planning how I would furnish my new home. I was so engrossed that I almost didn't remember that Lancelot hadn't called me back. At first, I thought about hiring an interior designer, but then I decided I could do it myself. After all, it's my house, and I'm the one living in it. In my previous life, I had always agreed with Herbert's choices, then with Lancelot and Persephone's opinion of what was right for Grandma. Now I wanted to create a space that reflected the real me. I ordered a huge sofa in a deep blue color that I had always dreamed of, but which Herbert thought was too bold. A king-size bed with a carved dark wood headboard, shelving to the ceiling for my book collection, an antique desk for the library, modern appliances for the kitchen. Every purchase was a pleasure, every choice was solely mine. The move took place in mid-September when the weather was beginning to change, but it was still warm enough to enjoy the garden. Shakespeare, my cat, was disoriented by the vast space at first, but quickly settled in and chose his favorite spot, on the windowsill in the conservatory, where the sun created a warm spot for most of the day. I spent the first weeks in my new home blissfully alone, enjoying the silence, the space, the ability to do whatever I wanted without looking at anyone else's opinion. I woke up when I wanted, had breakfast on the terrace, read in the garden, watched old movies in the home theater, swam in the pool, despite my age and what people would say. But gradually, I began to feel the need to socialize. All my old friends lived on the other side of the city, in the neighborhood where my former apartment was located. Getting from there to the Woodlands was difficult, especially for older people, many of whom no longer drove. I decided to get to know my neighbors. To Woodlands was a neighborhood of wealthy people, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, usually middle-aged with children. To my right lived a family with 3 teenagers and 3 dogs, noisy and friendly, but always in a hurry. On the left, a couple of young doctors who had recently moved to the city, polite but immersed in their work. Across the street, in an elegant Mediterranean chalet-style house, lived Agatha Rochford, a widow of about 65, a former opera singer who, after her career ended, founded a private vocal school. We met when I went out to check the mailbox and saw her struggling with the garden hose, trying to water her roses. "Need some help?" I asked as I approached. "Oh, you're my savior," she smiled. "The damn thing's always twisting. I'm Agatha, by the way. You must be the new mistress of the Henderson house." "Verity Sparks," I introduced myself. "Yes, I moved in a month ago." "Oh, that's wonderful," Agatha exclaimed. The Hendersons were terrible snobs, never said hello first. I'm afraid there are a lot of them in this neighborhood. But don't worry, I'll introduce you to some normal people. Would you like to come in for tea? And so our friendship began. Agatha turned out to be an amazing woman, witty, educated, with a wealth of life experience and a complete lack of desire to conform to anyone's expectations. To hell with public opinion, darling, she said, when I confessed that I sometimes felt out of place among the glamorous women of the tea woodlands. At our age, the only thing we have to worry about is getting everything we want out of life. We've already lived too long for other people. Agatha introduced me to her friends, Gloria, a former professor of anthropology, and her partner Inez, a freelance writer, Archie and Philippa, a married couple who owned an art gallery, Norman, a widower and chess enthusiast. All of them were unconventional, interesting, active people. Every Wednesday, we would gather at someone's house to play bridge or discuss books. On Saturdays, we went together to concerts, exhibitions, to the theater. Sometimes we organized themed dinners where everyone brought a dish from a certain cuisine of the world. At their suggestion, I started to learn new hobbies: watercolor painting, pottery, yoga for the elderly. I enrolled in cooking classes where I learned to cook dishes that I had only read about in books before. I bought myself a new closet, getting rid of the granny sweaters and flat-soled shoes that Persephone once called practical for your age. Now I wore bright colors, unusual accessories, and comfortable but stylish shoes. Agatha and I were especially close. Despite the age difference, she was 65, I was 75. We found many common interests. Both loved classical literature, jazz, French movies, long walks, and a good glass of wine at dinner. You know, Verity, she said one day as we sat on my terrace watching the sunset, sometimes I think our generation of women has been deceived. We've been indoctrinated that our worth is determined by how well we serve others, husbands, children, relatives. That self-sacrifice was a virtue, and as a result, many of us came to old age feeling that we had not lived our lives. I thought about my marriage to Herbert, about the years I'd spent raising Lancelot, about how I'd gradually dissolved into the roles of wife, mother, grandmother, no longer just Verity. You're right, I said. But you know what's amazing? Now, at 75, I feel more real than ever. Let's drink to that. Agatha raised her glass. About 2 months after I moved, I decided to create a Facebook account. I used to do without social networks. Why would an elderly single woman need them? But now that I had new friends, new interests, a new life, I wanted to share it. Agatha helped me set up my profile, add a photo, find old acquaintances. I was surprised to find how many people from my past were there: former colleagues, students, distant relatives. Lancelot was also among my friends, although he was almost inactive in my feed. Persephone was much more active. She was constantly posting photos of family trips, her children's school achievements, and her charity events. In all the pictures, they looked like a perfect family, smiling, successful, happy. I hardly commented on their publications, only occasionally giving them likes. Several times I tried to write Lancelot a personal message, but I received short, formal replies. "It's okay, Mom. Very busy. I'll call you this weekend." He never called. In early November, when I was fully settled into my new home, I decided to post some pictures. Not to brag, just to share my joy with the few people who might be interested. I chose the most successful pictures: the facade of the house in the rays of the setting sun, a cozy living room with a fireplace, a winter garden with blooming orchids, a terrace overlooking the garden. In one of the photos, I am myself, in a new blue dress, with a glass of wine, smiling, happy. I haven't been seen like this in years. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Agatha asked when I showed her the pictures I'd prepared. "Your son might be surprised." "Let him be surprised," I replied. I don't have to explain anything. After all, this is my life. Agatha looked at me with respect. You've changed, Verity. When I met you, you seemed so insecure. And now there's no trace of that woman left. I smiled. She's not gone. She just finally got a voice. That evening, I posted the photos with a simple caption: My new life. It's never too late to start over. The response was immediate. My new friends left enthusiastic comments. Former coworkers expressed surprise and joy for me. Several former students wrote to say they always knew I was cool. And then came a message from Persephone. Wow, Verity, what an amazing house. We didn't realize you had moved. Lancelot will be so happy for you. We should definitely come visit. I put the phone away without answering. Aunt Brianna's voice from my childhood memories echoed in my head. Never let others decide how you live your life, Verity, especially those who only remember you when they need something. I woke up to a ringing phone this morning. A name popped up on the screen that I hadn't seen in months. Lancelot. I stared at the phone screen with my son's name on it and couldn't bring myself to answer. 3 years of almost complete silence, and suddenly a call at 8 in the morning. Sure enough, after he saw pictures of my new house. On the fourth ring, I picked up the phone. Good morning, Lancelot, I said in a deliberately calm voice. Mom, he sounded genuinely excited. Why didn't you tell me you'd moved? And to such an amazing house. Persephone and I are in shock. I tried to contact you when I got the inheritance, I replied. You didn't return my calls. There was a short pause. Yes, I'm sorry, Mom, he said, a guilty note in his voice. You know how complicated things are for us. Work, children, lack of time. We think of you often, we just don't always get a chance to call. I wonder how often. Once a year on my birthday, which you forget anyway. I thought, but said out loud, I understand. Everyone has their own worries. Listen, Lancelot's voice became animated. We want to come to you. Tonight. The children miss their grandmother so much. Persephone and I miss them too. You don't know how happy we are for you. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to close that door forever, tell him it was my turn to be too busy. But the other part, the part that was still a mother, wanted to see my son, my grandchildren, even Persephone. All right, I said at last. Come by lunchtime, about 2 o'clock. Great, he exclaimed. We'll be there. Write down the address. You can find it on my Facebook profile, I replied dryly. Under the pictures you've obviously already seen. Pause again. Yes, of course. See you later, Mom. After the conversation, I called Agatha. I needed some advice from a friend. Oh dear, she said after listening to me. Be careful. People don't change that quickly. If he's been ignoring you for 3 years, and now suddenly he's all sonly love after seeing your mansion, well, I'd be wary. I know, I sighed, but he's still my son, and I want to see my grandchildren. Of course, Agatha softened. Just remember, you're no longer a defenseless old woman to be used. You have a choice, and if you need anything, call me anytime. I decided to order lunch from a nice restaurant instead of cooking it myself. Before, I would have spent all day in the kitchen trying to please Persephone and the kids. Now, I just called the Mediterranean restaurant Agatha had recommended and ordered a set for 5 with delivery. At exactly 2 o'clock, the gate bell rang. I turned on the intercom camera and saw a big black SUV, a new car. By the looks of it, the last one I knew of was a silver sedan. Lancelot was the first to get out of the car. He was still handsome in his 45, though there was gray in his hair and wrinkles around his eyes from the constant strain. Persephone followed, slim and trim, with flawless makeup and a new haircut. The grandchildren came reluctantly out of the back doors. Roland, an almost grown boy of 17. Tristan, a lanky 14-year-old, and Isolde, a 12-year-old girl who looked just like her mother. Mother! Lancelot rushed to me with open arms, as if we'd parted yesterday, not 3 years ago. You look beautiful. Doesn't Grandma look amazing, kids? The grandchildren mumbled something unintelligible, looking anywhere but at me. Verity, you're so good. Persephone threw her arms around me in a wave of expensive perfume. What an amazing house. We couldn't believe it when we saw the pictures. Thank you, I said. Come inside. I ordered lunch. You did? Persephone couldn't hide her surprise. We thought we were going to have your specialty pies. The last time I made them, you said they were too caloric for your diet, I reminded her. We made our way into the house. I watched their reactions with some satisfaction. Persephone's eyes widened at the sight of the marble floor in the hallway, the crystal chandelier, the antique furniture. Oh my God, she exhaled. It's just incredible. You didn't tell me you had such a large inheritance, Mother, Lancelot remarked, looking around. I tried, I repeated. I called 3 times, left messages. You never called back. I've been really busy at work, he answered quickly. We were launching a new project, and I was practically living in the office. For the next hour, I drove them around the house. Persephone couldn't contain her exclamation at the sight of every expensive detail. The Italian furniture, the French tapestries, the collection of paintings I'd started to collect. How much is this worth? She asked, pointing to a Ming vase or an antique clock. And this? How about this one? Roland showed interest only in the home theater and the billiard game room I had set up for guests. That's a cool setup, he said, looking at the sound system. I could use one of those. Maybe for Christmas? Persephone said, looking at me meaningfully. Tristan spent the whole inspection with his headphones on, only nodding occasionally in response to my questions. But Isolde, to my surprise, was genuinely interested. Grandma, did you draw this? She asked, pointing to the watercolor landscape in the hallway. Yes, these are my first attempts, I smiled. I've recently started taking painting lessons. Cool. She scrutinized the painting. I like to paint too, but my mom says it's a waste of time. Isolde, Persephone snapped at her. I never said that. I was only suggesting that you try something more promising for your future career. When we reached my bedroom, with its huge bed and walk-in closet, Persephone couldn't hide her envy. God, Verity, why do you have such a big bed and so much room for your clothes? Because I can afford it, I answered simply, and I like waking up in a nice room. But you must be lonely in such a big house, don't you? She asked me in a heartfelt voice. All these rooms, and you're all alone. I have Shakespeare, I pointed to the cat, who was watching us from the windowsill, and friends who often come to visit. Friends? Lancelot looked surprised. What friends? New ones, I answered. Neighbors, people from the book club, from art classes. Ah, how nice, Persephone said condescendingly. But still, it's not the same as family. We're so worried about you. At dinner, the conversation flowed awkwardly, with long pauses. Lancelot and Persephone exchanged glances, as if deciding who would speak first about something important. The grandchildren ate in silence, only occasionally answering my questions about school and hobbies. So, where did this inheritance come from, Verity? Persephone finally asked when we reached dessert. Lancelot said you didn't have any rich relatives. My great-aunt Brianna, I answered. She had no children, so she left everything to me. Exactly how much did she leave? Persephone asked bluntly. Enough to buy this house and live comfortably for the rest of my life. Grandma, can I have a new iPhone? Tristan asked, speaking directly to me for the first time all lunch. Everyone in the class already has one, but I have an older model. Tristan. Lancelot was indignant, but somehow unconvincing. Why? The boy shrugged. Grandmother's rich now, so she can give it to me. I need a new cell phone too, Roland said, and a laptop for college. I looked at my grandchildren and bitterly realized that I hardly knew them. These teenagers, demanding expensive gadgets from a grandmother they hadn't seen in 3 years, were strangers to me. I don't need anything, Isolde said quietly. Just maybe some good paints, if you really want to give something, Grandma. After dinner, we moved to the drawing room. Lancelot and Persephone sat down opposite me, obviously preparing for a serious conversation. Mother, Lancelot began, we wanted to talk to you about the future. It seems to us that a house this big is too much for you alone. So many rooms, such a large garden. It takes care, time, effort. I have a gardener and a housekeeper, I said. I can manage. But still, Persephone intervened, it's not safe to live alone at your age. What if something happens? Who will help you? I have a panic button and neighbors who visit regularly. We've been thinking, the son continued, maybe you should move in with us. We have a guest room on the first floor, very comfortable, and this house could be rented out. Can you imagine how much rent a mansion like this would bring in? And who will manage that money? I asked you directly. Well, Lancelot hesitated. You, of course. It's just that we could help you with the paperwork, finding tenants, financial management, Persephone added. It's a fortune, Verity. It needs to be managed properly. You know, Mother, Lancelot stepped forward. We're worried about you. You're not old, and this house, it's too big, too luxurious. You need something simpler, closer to us. Why would a man of your age need a mansion like this? Persephone supported him. It's irrational. I like being irrational, I said calmly. For the first time in my life, I can afford to live the way I want to live, not the way others think is right. We've always remembered you, Lancelot said quietly. It's just that life is so crazy. Work, kids, loans. Speaking of loans, Persephone intervened. We're in a difficult financial situation right now, Verity. Roland's going to college next year, which is a huge expense, and Lancelot's job is downsizing. You could lose your job? I asked my son. It's a possibility. He nodded. The company is going through some bad times, and the mortgage, the car, the insurance, the children's education. We're barely making ends meet. I noticed Persephone involuntarily adjusting the expensive watch on her wrist. Her designer handbag, tossed carelessly on the couch, was probably worth the monthly salary of an average worker. Barely making ends meet, I repeated. Is that why you bought a new car? Lancelot was embarrassed. It, it was a necessity. The old one was falling apart. I looked at my watch. It was almost 6 in the evening. Thank you for coming, I said, rising. It was nice to see you all, but I'm tired, and I still have plans for tonight. Plans? Lancelot looked confused. What are they? My friends are coming over at 7, I answered. We play bridge on Wednesdays. But we haven't seen each other for so long, Persephone protested. We have so much to talk about. We can do it another time, I said. Call and make an appointment. They rose reluctantly. Only Isolde stopped to say quietly, Thank you, Grandmother. You have a very beautiful house, and I've missed you. I hugged her, feeling genuinely warm for the first time all day. As I walked them to the car, I noticed Lancelot and Persephone talking tensely, giving me concerned glances. As they were getting into the car, Lancelot turned and said, Mom, can I talk to you for a minute? He pulled me away from the others. Look, I know we haven't been the best of relatives these last few years, he began, but we really need help right now. I'm in debt, a lot of debt. If I lose my job, How much? I asked him bluntly. 200,000. He lowered his eyes. Loans, mortgages, children's education, and Persephone's watch, I added. Yes, she likes beautiful things. He sighed. But that's not the point. I'm afraid for the children, for their future. If we lose the house, you want me to give you 200,000? I asked. That would be a huge help. He nodded. I'd pay it back as soon as I got back on my feet. With interest, if you want. I remembered how he'd said the same thing when I'd given him my savings, and how he'd never paid me back $1. I'll think about it, I said. I need some time. Of course, Mom. He hugged me in relief. I knew you'd understand. You always have. I watched their car pull out of the gate and felt strangely empty. For the first time in years, I saw my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, and realized that they were still the same as they had always been. Only now they had a new interest in me. Financial. When I got back to the house, the first thing I did was call Agatha. Are they here yet? She asked instead of greeting me. They'd already left, I answered. You were right. It was all about the money. I told her briefly about the visit, about the transparent hints of financial help, about the offer to move in and rent my house to them, about Lancelot's direct request for 200,000. Oh, Verity, Agatha sighed. How predictable. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. And what did you really think? I paused, staring out the window at the garden, lit by the evening sun. Part of me wants to help. He is my son after all. But the other part, tired of being an ATM machine that only comes to mind when the money runs out. You've helped him before, Agatha said. And, was he grateful? Did he change his attitude toward you? No, I admitted. More like he took my help for granted. Exactly, she said with a firmness in her voice. Verity, I know you love your son, but sometimes true love means letting people face the consequences of their decisions. If you bail him out again, what will change? He'll continue to live beyond his means. Persephone will continue to buy designer clothes, and they'll come to you for money again in a year. I knew she was right, but knowing it with my mind, I still felt guilty in my heart. Shouldn't a mother always help her child? Isn't it selfish of me to live in luxury while my son is in debt? Maybe I should, I started. No, Agatha interrupted. You don't owe him anything. You've already given him 40 years of your life. You've been a good mother, good enough. Now it's your turn to live for yourself. After talking to her, I felt a little more confident, but I still couldn't shake the doubts. I decided to give myself until tomorrow to think it over. But an hour later, as I was getting ready for my friends to come over for a game of bridge, the doorbell rang. Lancelot and Persephone stood on the doorstep. Mom, he began from the doorway, I'm sorry we're here unannounced, but we need to have a serious talk. I stepped back silently, letting them into the house. And the children? I asked, not seeing the grandchildren. We left them with my mother, Persephone replied. This conversation is not for children's ears. Well, I thought, at least it's honest. My friends will be here in half an hour, I warned. We don't have much time. Cancel it, Persephone said, taking off her coat. This is more important than some card games. I felt a wave of indignation rise inside me. How easily this woman decides what's important to me and what isn't. My plans are as important as yours, I said firmly. Half an hour is all you have. Persephone looked as if she wanted to object, but Lancelot put a hand on her shoulder. Of course, Mother, we understand, he said. Let's get right down to business. We went into the parlor. I sat down in my favorite chair, and they sat on the couch across from me. Mother, Lancelot began, I haven't been completely honest this afternoon. The situation is much more serious than I said. It's not just 200,000 in debt. Yeah, I've made some bad investments. Bad investments, I repeated. I invested in a friend's startup. He avoided looking me in the eye. It seemed promising. Everyone said it was a win-win. But the company went bankrupt. And not only did I lose my money, but I took out a loan against the house. I took out a loan against the house. And now the bank wants to foreclose on your house? I guessed. Yes, he nodded. We only have 2 months to pay off the loan, or we'll lose the house. And that means the kids will have to change schools, friends. It'll ruin their lives. How much do you need? I asked bluntly. Lancelot looked at Persephone. 500,000, he answered quietly. I couldn't hold back a surprised gasp. 500,000? But this afternoon you were talking about 200. I was afraid I'd shock you, he said. But there's no time for half-truths now. We need 500,000 to keep the house and pay off the other debts. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When did he learn to lie like that? When did he become able to look me in the eye and talk first about 200 and a few hours later about 500,000? But that's not all, Persephone intervened. Lancelot and I have given it a lot of thought, and we've come to the conclusion that you, Verity, really should move in with us, not only because of your age and health, but also for financial reasons. What kind of considerations? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tax optimization, she said with the look of an expert. If you sign this house over to us, you can avoid most of the taxes, and we'll make sure you keep the right to live here for the rest of your life. So, you want me to give you a house worth $3 million, give you 500,000, and move in with you? I clarified. It sounds strange when you put it that way, Mother. Lancelot grinned nervously. But it's actually good for everyone. You'll be looked after, not alone. We'll keep our house, and we can rent or sell this one in the future. When I'm dead, I mentally finished for him. And you've already decided? I asked. What to do with my house and my money? We're just trying to help, Persephone exclaimed. You're an old woman, Verity. It's hard for you to understand all the legal and financial intricacies. We want to save you the trouble. I felt anger rising inside me. Not the cold anger I'd felt before, but hot, burning anger. That's very thoughtful, I said, trying to stay calm. And when do you plan to do all this? The sooner the better, Lancelot answered. We've already consulted with a lawyer. He can have the documents ready by the end of the week. By the end of the week, I repeated. That means in 3 days I have to give you my house, $500,000, and move into your guest room. You make it sound like we're trying to trick you, Mom, Lancelot said, resentment in his voice. We're your family. We care about you. You do, I nodded. That's why you didn't call for 3 years. That's why you only remembered me when you saw the pictures of my new house. We've been busy, Persephone began to justify herself. We have kids, work. We all have kids and jobs, I interrupted. But most people still find time to call their mothers once a month. Mom? Lancelot stepped forward. Let's not get into this right now. We're in a crisis. We could lose the house. The kids would have to change schools. Do you really want your grandchildren to suffer for principles? This is it. The manipulation I expected. If you don't help, you're a bad grandmother. You're to blame for your children's suffering. I'll think about it, I said, deciding not to reveal my true feelings just yet. I need time. There is no time, Mother, Lancelot insisted. The bank gave us until the end of the month. If we don't make the payment, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. And you only found out about this today? I asked. Or did you know before, but you only decided to come to me after you saw my new house? They looked at each other. Persephone bit her lip. Lancelot looked embarrassed. We've known about the problems for a long time, he admitted at last. But we didn't want to bother you. We tried to handle it ourselves. And then we saw the pictures and decided I was the perfect solution to your problems. I finished. Not so cynical, Mom, Lancelot exclaimed. Yes, we saw your house and realized you had an opportunity to help. What's wrong with that? Shouldn't a family support each other in times of need? Family, I repeated thoughtfully. You know what's interesting? When your father died, I was alone. I had a hard time emotionally, financially. But you were slow to support me. You were busy. When I turned 70, you forgot to call. And at 71, too. And at 72 and 73. But now that you need money, you suddenly remembered you have a mother. It's not fair, he protested. We've always loved you. It's just that we have our own lives, our own problems. And I have my own, I finished. And my own property, which I will dispose of as I see fit. So you refuse to help? Persephone's voice sounded steely. I didn't say that, I said calmly. I said I needed time to think. But, she began. Persephone, Lancelot squeezed her hand. Mother is right. This is a big decision. She needs time. He turned to me with a smile that seemed almost genuine. Of course, Mother. Take all the time you need. Just not too long, okay? We really don't have much time. That's when the doorbell rang. My friends were coming over for a game of bridge. We should go, I said, getting up. I'll let you know my decision. But you haven't said you're thinking about moving, Persephone reminded me. I'll think about that too, I replied, heading for the door. As I walked them out, I noticed that they were whispering again, giving me concerned glances. As they were getting into the car, Lancelot turned to me. Mom, I know this is hard, but you realize that family comes first, don't you? Think of your grandchildren. It's not their fault. With these words, they left, and I returned to the house, where Agatha, Norman, and the couple Philip and Archie were waiting for me. My true friends, people who valued me, not my money. What's wrong? Agatha asked, seeing my face. Is it your son again? Yes, I sighed. They came to ask for money, 500,000 now. How much? She exclaimed. And you? I said I'd think about it. I sank tiredly into the chair. But there's nothing to think about. So you're not going to help them? Philippa asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to send them away, but the other part, he's my son. And it's not the grandchildren's fault. Blame is one thing, said Norman, a retired philosophy professor. Saving us from the consequences of our own stupidity is quite another. Sometimes the best thing we can do for our children is to let them reap what they sow. Norman's right, Archie seconded. If you bail them out now, what will they learn? That you can spend money endlessly on stupid things and then come to Mom and she'll fix it. And they want me to sign the house over to them and move in with them, I added. What? Agatha almost choked on her tea. Are they serious? Absolutely, I nodded. For tax optimization. My God. Philippa shook her head. What a cheeky thing to say. Verity, Agatha took my hand. You do realize that if you agree, they'll sell this house as soon as the ink on the deed dries, right? And they'll control your every move, every dollar. You'll be a prisoner in their house. I knew she was right. And yet, but how could I say no to my own son? I asked. What if they do lose the house? Where will the kids go? They'll find another place to live, Archie shrugged. Maybe not as luxurious as it is now, but they'll have a roof over their heads. And maybe it will teach them to appreciate what they have, Philippa added. We played bridge, but I was distracted and kept losing. My thoughts went back to my conversation with Lancelot, to his request, to how easily he and Persephone planned to dispose of my life and my possessions. When my friends dispersed, I called Agatha. Despite the late hour, she picked up the phone right away. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "I can't stop thinking about their offer," I confessed. Or rather, the demand. "What have you decided?" I know I should say no, but how can I be sure it's the right thing to do? That I'm not being selfish? Agatha was silent for a moment. "Verity," she said at last, "I want you to imagine the situation from the outside. If a friend of yours told you that her son, who hadn't visited her in years, suddenly showed up on her doorstep demanding all the money in the house, what would you advise her?" I thought about it. I would tell her. I'd tell her it was manipulative, that if she agreed, she would lose not only the money and the house, but her self-respect, that her son would never learn to take responsibility for his actions if his mother always saved him. Exactly, Agatha agreed. Now think about it. Doesn't that apply to you just as much? It does, I admitted, but I still feel awful, like I'm betraying my child. No, Verity, he's the one who betrayed you when he decided he could disappear from your life for years and then come back when he needed money. He's the one who turned your relationship into a transaction, and he's the one who should feel terrible, not you. I was silent, mulling over her words. "You know," Agatha continued, "my mother sacrificed her whole life for my brother, gave him the last of her money, tolerated his rudeness, excused his misbehavior, and in the end, he drank himself to death, squandered everything she gave him, and when she got sick, he didn't even come to the hospital. Because he was used to getting, not giving. Your Lancelot's going the same way." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "What your heart tells you to do," Agatha said. "But remember, sometimes love means saying no." After the conversation, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the starry sky outside the window. Images from the past flashed through my mind. Little Lancelot going to school for the first time, his graduation, his wedding, the birth of his grandchildren, and more recent memories, forgotten birthdays, condescending looks, unanswered phone calls, years of loneliness. I thought of Lancelot's words. Families should support each other in times of need. Yes, they should, but support is a two-way road. Ours had long since become a one-way road. By morning, I had made a decision. Maybe not the easiest, but the only right one. And for the first time in years, I felt that I was doing the right thing not only for them, but for myself as well. The next morning, I called Lancelot and invited the whole family over for dinner. "I'll have an answer to your proposal," I said. He sounded enthusiastic, confident that I would agree to help. I didn't dissuade him. All day I had been preparing for this conversation, mentally rehearsing what I wanted to say. For the first time in many years of motherhood, I was going to put my own interests ahead of my son's. It was scary and liberating at the same time. I decided not to order food from the restaurant, but to make dinner myself, not for Persephone, who would find something to complain about, but for myself. I baked an apple pie from my grandmother's recipe, the same one Lancelot had loved as a child. It might be our last family dinner, and I wanted it to be special. They arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, the whole family, including the children. Roland and Tristan looked bored. Isolde looked wary, as if she sensed something was wrong. Lancelot was lively, Persephone tense. "Mother, have you been cooking?" Lancelot wondered, smelling the pie. I shouldn't have bothered. "It's no trouble at all," I said. "Come in, everything is ready." We didn't talk much at dinner. The children answered my questions about school with one word, and Persephone kept glancing at her watch as if she had more important things to do. Lancelot tried to keep the conversation light, but I could see he was nervous. Finally, when we got to dessert, he couldn't take it anymore. "So, what have you decided, Mom?" About our conversation. I set my fork aside and straightened up. This was the moment of truth. I've thought it over, I began, and I've made a decision. Persephone stepped forward. I won't give you the money, I said calmly. Not 500,000, not 200, not a dollar. I'm not signing over the house to you or moving into your guest room. There was a deafening silence in the dining room. Lancelot looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Persephone turned pale, then red with anger. The children froze, not realizing what was happening. You, what? Lancelot finally squeezed out. I refuse you, I repeated firmly. This is my final decision. But why? He looked genuinely surprised. We've explained how we need help. We could lose the house. I know, I nodded, and I'm sorry. But these are the consequences of your decisions, not mine. I can't believe it. Persephone jumped up from her seat. You're sitting in this big house, swimming in money, and you refuse to help your own son? What kind of mother are you? That's a good question. I looked her straight in the eye. What kind of mother am I? The kind that put her son's interests ahead of her own for 30 years. The one who gave away her life savings when he needed money. The one who babysat your grandchildren when it suited you and who you forgot when you didn't need a free babysitter. Mommy, Lancelot exclaimed, it's not fair. Unfair? I shook my head. You know what isn't fair? That after my father died, you almost disappeared from my life. That you forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. That you didn't invite me over last Christmas. That I had to call you and you didn't call me back for weeks. That's not fair. We had our own lives, he began to justify. Kids, work, always running out of time. Everyone has a life, I interrupted, but most people make time for their loved ones, especially if they're lonely and old. How dare you? Persephone exclaimed. After all Lancelot has done for you. What exactly has he done for me? I asked. In the last 5 years, what? Helped you move after my father died? That only took 1 day. What else? She opened her mouth but couldn't find anything to say. Exactly, I nodded. Nothing. I did a lot for you, though. Babysitting when you needed a break. Cooked, did laundry, cleaned. Gave you my savings, which Lancelot never returned, even though he promised. And you never once thanked me. Not once did you ask me how I lived, if I was lonely, if I needed help. You're not being fair, Mother, Lancelot said, resentment in his voice. We've always loved you. Loved you? I grinned bitterly. Love is not words, but actions, and your actions say otherwise. So you're just leaving us in the lurch. Persephone crossed her arms over her chest. Are you willing to see your grandchildren homeless just to get back at us? No one will be homeless, I said calmly. At the very least, you'll sell your huge house and buy something smaller, or rent an apartment, or move in with your parents, Persephone. You have options. But it would be terrible for the children, she exclaimed. They'd have to change schools, friends. Yes, it won't be easy, I agreed. But you created this situation when you took out loans and made bad investments. Now you have to deal with it, not wait for me to fix it. Mom, Lancelot lowered his voice. I understand you're resentful of us, and perhaps you have reason to be. But would you let your resentment get in the way of helping your son, your grandchildren? It's not about resentment. I shook my head. It's about realization. I finally realized that to you, I'm not a person with feelings and needs. I'm an ATM machine that has to dispense money on demand, or a free babysitter that you can call when it's convenient and forget about when you don't need it. I don't want to be either of those things anymore. Silence reigned. Lancelot looked at me with disbelief, Persephone with ill-concealed rage. The children looked from their parents to me. unsure of what was going on. What about family values? Lancelot finally asked. Shouldn't a family support each other? Yes, I agreed. But family is a two-way road. Ours has been one way for a long time. So you're saying that if we called more often, came more often, you'd give us money? Persephone squinted her eyes. Is this some kind of attention extortion? No, dear, I looked at her regretfully. It's a statement of fact. You only think of me when you need something. And I don't want to be a utility function anymore. I want to be a person who is appreciated for what he is, not for what he can give. And now what? Lancelot asked. What do we do? The same thing most people do when they're in financial trouble, I replied. Look for a solution. Work more. Spend less. Sell what we can't afford. Live within your means, not in debt. You know I'm having trouble getting a job, he reminded me. I know, and I sympathize, but it's not my responsibility to solve your problems. I always knew you were a selfish woman, Verity, Persephone sneered. But I didn't think you were that selfish. I gave her a long look. Selfish, I said thoughtfully. It's an interesting word. When a woman sacrifices her whole life for others, it's considered normal. But once she thinks about herself, she's selfish. You know, Persephone, at 75, I finally realized that sometimes being selfish is just an act of self-preservation. If you don't help us, Lancelot said suddenly, we won't come again, and we won't bring the children. You'll never see your grandchildren. I felt my heart clench. This was the last weapon, the most painful blow, the threat to deprive me of my grandchildren, Isolde, who was just beginning to reach out to me. The boys, who, alienated though they were still part of my family, my blood. That's your right, I said quietly. But think about what you're teaching your children by doing this. That a grandmother is only valuable as long as she gives money? That love can be bought and sold? Don't be so dramatic, Mother, Lancelot grimaced. I'm just saying we won't have time for visits if we lose the house. We'll be too busy trying to survive. I understand, I nodded, and I'm sorry about that. I really am. But my decision won't change. Even if it means losing your family? He looked at me questioningly. I already lost you a long time ago, I replied. The moment you decided I wasn't worth your time. Today, I'm just admitting that fact out loud. Persephone stood up abruptly. We're leaving, she announced. I'm not going to sit here and listen to these insults. Children, pack up. But we haven't finished the pie yet, Isolde objected. No pie. Persephone cut her off. We're leaving, now. Lancelot stood up too, looking both angry and confused. You're making a mistake, Mother, he said. A huge mistake that you'll regret. Maybe, I agreed. But it's my mistake, and I'm willing to live with it. They started packing, talking defiantly loudly, as if I wasn't in the room. Persephone was giving instructions to the children. Lancelot was checking his phone, pretending not to care. I watched in silence, feeling strangely calm. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had suddenly fallen from my shoulders. Yes, it was painful. Yes, I might have lost touch with my grandchildren, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. Not for them, but for me. When they were already in the hallway, Isolde suddenly turned and came running toward me. Grandmother, she said quietly, I don't want to go away like this. May I write to you? I hugged her, feeling tears come to my eyes. Of course, baby. I shall always be glad of your letters. Isolde, Persephone shouted at her. Come here at once. The girl pulled away regretfully and ran to her mother. I saw Persephone grab her arm and whisper something angrily in her ear. Isolde lowered her head, but before she went out the door, she turned around and waved at me. We'll talk again, Mother, Lancelot said, standing on the threshold. When you've cooled down and come to your senses, I will not change my mind, I said firmly, but I'll always be glad to see you if you come not for money, but just to visit your mother and grandmother. As if we have time for meaningless visits, Persephone snorted, especially now that we have to deal with the problems you refuse to help solve. With that, they left, slamming the door loudly. I stood in the hallway, listening to their car's engine start, to the crunch of gravel under its wheels, to the sound of the car driving away. The silence after they left was deafening. I slowly made my way back to the dining room, where an unfinished dinner, untouched apple pie, and scattered napkins remained on the table, evidence of the family drama that had just played out under my roof. I began mechanically clearing the table, stacking plates, throwing away leftovers. My hands were shaking slightly, but overall I felt surprisingly calm. It was as if an inner voice was telling me, "You did the right thing." When I finished cleaning up, I poured myself a glass of wine and went out onto the terrace. The night was warm and starry. Crickets chirped in the garden, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of passing cars. It was an ordinary, peaceful night, which in no way reflected the storm that had occurred in my house. I thought about my decision, about its consequences, about whether I'd done the right thing. Part of me still doubted. My maternal instinct was screaming, "How could you say no to your own son? How could you risk losing touch with your grandchildren?" But the other part, the more rational, more mature part, knew if I said yes, it would be the end of my independence, my dignity, my new life. I would become a prisoner in their home, a cash cow, valued only for what she gives. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Agatha. "How's it going?" she asked without preamble. "Did you tell them?" "Yes," I answered. "They didn't take it very well." "No wonder," she said with a snicker. "So, what now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "They're gone. Lancelot said I'd regret my decision. Persephone called me selfish. They threatened I'd never see my grandchildren again." "Emotional blackmail," Agatha stated. "Classic move. How do you feel?" "I've been thinking." Strange, but free. Like I'd finally said out loud what I'd been holding in for years. Like I'd let go of a burden I'd been carrying for too long. "That's a good sign," she said. "It means you did the right thing." But what if I never see my grandchildren again? That fear was still gnawing at me inside. "They'll grow up," Agatha said. "They'll decide for themselves if they want to be with their grandmother. Until then, Verity, you can't let yourself be blackmailed. It'll never end. Today it's 500,000. Tomorrow it's 1 million. The day after that it's the whole house and savings." I knew she was right. And yet, "Isolde came to me before she left," I said. "Asked if she could write to me. She's such a good girl, Agatha, not like her parents." "You see?" There was satisfaction in Agatha's voice. "There's already a bond they can't break, no matter how hard they try. If the girl wants to communicate with you, she'll find a way. And boys, who knows? Maybe when they grow up, they'll realize who was really looking out for their welfare." We talked for a long time, and every minute I felt more and more sure of my decision. Yes, it wasn't easy. Yes, it could lead to a long rift with my son. But I could no longer live in a world where my worth was defined only by my usefulness to others. By the time we finished talking, it was past midnight. I finished my wine, looking up at the stars, and remembered Aunt Brianna's words from the letter in the will. "Verity, it's never too late to start living for yourself. Remember, you don't have to live up to other people's expectations. The only person you are accountable to is yourself." She was a wise woman, my aunt. Too bad it took me 75 years to realize the depth of her words. It had been a week since I had refused to help Lancelot and his family. A week of silence and unaccustomed calm. No calls, no messages, no visits. It was as if they didn't exist in my life at all. Well, it had been like that before they found out about my inheritance. Every morning I woke up with a dual feeling, a heavy sadness at the realization that I might have lost touch with my son and grandchildren forever, and a strange, almost dizzying relief that I no longer had to pretend that everything was all right, as if I wasn't hurt by their indifference, their condescension, their idea of me as a useless old woman who could only be demanded of without giving anything in return. On Wednesday, I received a Facebook message from Isolde, sent from her friend's account. Grandma, I miss you. My mom forbade me to write to you, but I will anyway. Just don't tell anyone. Love you. I sat looking at those simple words for a long time, feeling my eyes fill with tears. My little girl who would risk disobeying her mother to keep in touch with me. There was something of me in her, something Lancelot didn't have, an inner core, an ability to see people and not just what they can give. I answered her, I miss you too, darling, and I love you very much. Write when you can, and don't worry. It stays between us. I knew Persephone would be furious to learn of our secret correspondence, but hadn't she herself taught the children that Grandma only had value when she gave money? That family ties can be severed on a whim when they are no longer profitable? Why, then, is she surprised that her daughter hasn't learned that lesson? On Thursday, Agatha offered me a trip into town. You need to unwind, she said. We spent the day walking through art galleries, eating at a small French bistro, buying things we liked simply because we could afford it. No excuses, no, it's too expensive, or what will people say? Just two not young women enjoying life on their own terms. You know, Agatha said as we sat in the cafe over a cup of espresso, I've noticed one thing. Men become more and more valuable in the eyes of society as they age. Wise old man, honorable gentleman, respected patriarch. And women are the opposite. The older we get, the more invisible we become. Unless we fulfill a role approved by society. Selfless mother, sacrificial grandmother, uncomplaining mother-in-law. You're right, I agreed. All our lives we are taught that our value is in serving others. First to our parents, then to our husband, then to our children, then to our grandchildren. But what's left for ourselves? When is it our turn to live? Apparently never, Agatha hummed. At least, that's what society thinks. But you know what? To hell with society. We're in our 60s. We've earned the right to live the way we want to live, not the way other people expect us to live. On Saturday, Norman, an elderly widower whom we met in a painting class, came to visit me, an intelligent, educated man with kind eyes and a slight irony about everything, including himself. He invited me to a classical music concert in the city park. It's not a date, Verity, he said, noticing my hesitation. Just two lonely people who'd rather listen to Vivaldi together than apart. I agreed, feeling for the first time in years that I wasn't Grandma Verity, but simply a woman who'd been asked out by an interesting man. We spent a wonderful evening listening to music, talking about everything in the world, sharing stories from our long lives. Norman told how he lost his wife 5 years ago and thought his life was over. And then I realized that Elizabeth would want me to live on, not to exist, but to live. On Sunday, I decided to visit the local animal shelter. I had always loved dogs, but after Herbert's death, I had never decided to get a new one. It seemed like it would be a betrayal of our old Labrador Bruno, who had gone after his owner after 6 months. Perhaps it was time to change that. The shelter was noisy, smelling of disinfection and animals. Dogs barked, cats meowed, volunteers scurried back and forth, feeding, walking, caring for their charges. What can I do for you? I asked a young woman who, judging by her badge, was the volunteer coordinator. Would you like to take an animal? She asked. Maybe, I replied, but first I would like to help as a volunteer. I have a lot of free time and I love animals. Her face brightened up. Oh, that's wonderful. We always need people, especially on weekdays when most volunteers are at work. You could help with feeding, walking, just sitting with the animals to get them used to human company. This is especially important for abuse survivors. That's how I became a volunteer at the Happy Paws shelter. 3 times a week, I would go there for a few hours, feed the cats, walk the dogs, just sit next to particularly frightened animals, reading aloud to them or talking quietly. It gave me a sense of need, a sense of meaningfulness that I had lost after Lancelot grew up and no longer needed me. I was especially attached to an old mutt named Roxy, toothless, with a cataract in one eye and a limp hind leg. Her owner had died, and her relatives refused to take her. Too old, too sick, too troublesome. I saw myself in her, a creature whose value was measured by usefulness, not just the right to love and care. No one will take her, the volunteer coordinator told me. Everyone wants puppies or at least young dogs. Who wants an old wreck with a year or two to live? Me, I replied. I'll take her. And so my house had a new resident. Roxy couldn't climb the stairs, so I made a place for her in the conservatory, next to Shakespeare, my cat. He wasn't happy at first, but he gradually accepted it and even began to sleep next to Roxy, snuggling up against her warm side. The two old animals found peace in each other, just as I found peace in their company. Over the next month, I began actively planning the trip I had dreamed of all my life, a trip to Europe. Herbert had always wanted to show me Paris, Rome, Barcelona. But first there was no money, then no time, then no health. And now I had both, and I had both, and I had both. And no one to say, at your age, alone, you're crazy. Agatha decided to join me. Two old peppers conquering Europe, she laughed. Sounds like the title of a comedy. We booked plane tickets, hotels in 3 cities, made a list of museums and restaurants we wanted to visit. No group tours for seniors, no restrictions, just what interested us. Planning the trip took over me so much that I almost didn't think about Lancelot and his family. Almost, but not quite. Sometimes, usually at night, I felt homesick. I remembered Lancelot the boy, inquisitive, gentle, attached to his mother. Where had that child gone? When did he turn into a calculating man for whom I had become a source of financial support? At such moments, I took out my photo album and leafed through old pictures. Here was Herbert holding his newborn son. Here was Lancelot taking his first steps. Here was his first school day, graduation, wedding. He's smiling in all the pictures, and I try to find in those smiles a hint of what he will become years from now. Was there some sign I missed? A moment when things could have gone differently? Sometimes I'm racked with guilt. Maybe I wasn't a good enough mom. Maybe I expected too much from him, or, on the contrary, too little, too forgiving, too manipulative. But then I thought of other mothers, other sons, Gloria and her son Patrick, who called her every day, even though he lived in another city. Philippa and her daughters, who never missed a birthday, took care of her during her illness, considered her opinion. No, it wasn't about me. At least, it wasn't just me. A month after our last meeting, Lancelot called. I was just packing my suitcase for a trip to Europe that was to start in 3 days. Mom? His voice sounded unusually quiet. We need to talk. I'm listening, I replied as I continued packing. Not on the phone. Can I come? Alone, without Persephone and the kids? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from more manipulation and accusations. But the other part, the part that would always be a mother, couldn't help but respond to that quiet voice. Okay, I said. Come by tomorrow at 11, but I don't have much time. I'm leaving in 3 days. You're leaving? He seemed surprised. Where? To Europe, I said. Agatha and I are going to Paris, Rome, and Barcelona for 3 weeks. Oh, was all he said. Okay, see you tomorrow, Mom. The next day at 11 sharp, the gate bell rang. Lancelot arrived in a cab, not his SUV. The first sign that something had changed. He looked gaunt, tired, dark circles under his eyes. He was dressed plainly, in jeans and a sweater, not the designer stuff I was used to. Come on in, I said, letting him into the house. We walked into the living room. Roxy, seeing the stranger, growled quietly from her corner. You have a dog? Lancelot wondered. Yes, I nodded. I got her from the shelter a month ago. Her name is Roxy. I didn't know you liked dogs, he said thoughtfully. I mean, I knew you and your dad had Bruno, but I thought it was his idea. That's the problem, Lancelot. I sighed. There's a lot you don't know about me, because you've never asked. He lowered his head. You're right, and I've come to apologize for everything. I stared at him in silence, waiting for him to continue. We lost the house, he said quietly. The bank foreclosed a week ago. We're staying with Persephone's parents now. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. No, you're not, he grinned bitterly. You warned us. You said we were living beyond our means, and we didn't listen. We thought there was always a way out, that you'd save us like you'd saved us before. I didn't argue. Yes, part of me felt good that life had taught him a lesson, but a bigger part of me was still rooting for my son, for my grandchildren, having to go through such changes. How are the children? I asked. They're different, he sighed. Roland is angry at the world, especially at you. He thinks you should have helped us. Tristan's withdrawn, barely speaking. And Isolde, she seems strangely the most mature of us all. She said it was our own fault and that you had the right to use your money however you wanted. I smiled, thinking of my little granddaughter with such an adult understanding of the situation. Persephone has filed for divorce, Lancelot said suddenly. She said she didn't marry a promising financier to live in her parents' house and save on everything. I wasn't surprised. Persephone had always valued status and material possessions over relationships. So what are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, he shrugged. Look for a job, any job. Rent a modest apartment. Start all over again. Without Persephone, though, and probably without the kids. She wants full custody. You're going to fight for them? For Isolde, yes. He nodded. She needs me. The boys. They're almost grown up and, frankly, more like their mother than they are like me. We were silent for a moment. I looked at my son and saw in him the features of the boy I once knew. Vulnerable, insecure, seeking approval. I didn't come to ask for money, Mom, he said suddenly. I realized you were right, right about everything. We'd been using you, taking you for granted, only remembering you when we needed something. And when you finally said no, we blamed you instead of ourselves. It was wrong, and I apologize. I felt a lump come up in my throat. I hadn't expected to hear him say that. Thank you, I said quietly. It's important to me. I don't know if we'll ever get back together, he continued. I realize I've hurt you deeply, but I wanted you to know that I've realized my mistakes, and I will try not to repeat them with my own children. That's the most important thing, Lancelot, I said. To learn from your mistakes and become a better person. And you know, it's never too late to start over. It took me 75 years to realize that. He smiled weakly. You've changed, Mom. You've gotten stronger, more confident. I didn't notice before. Because all you saw in me was an old woman who had to live up to your expectations, I said without rebuke, just stating the fact. And I've always been more than just a mother or a grandmother. I was, and still am, a person with my own dreams, my own desires, my own interests. I'm sorry, he said again. I forgive you, I said sincerely. But that doesn't mean that everything will go back to the way it was. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that takes time. He nodded, understanding. Can I call you sometimes? He asked. Just to see how you're doing. Not to ask for anything. Of course, I smiled. And when I get back from my trip, you can bring Isolde to visit, if you want to. She'd love that, he said, standing up. She misses you. We said goodbye with restraint, but without the same bitterness. I didn't know if Lancelot would keep his promises, if he would really change, or if this was just a moment of weakness after which he would return to his old attitude. But it didn't matter so much anymore. I realized the main thing: my worth does not depend on his recognition. I am worthy of love and respect simply because of who I am, not because I am useful to anyone. 3 days later, Agatha and I boarded a plane bound for Paris. Roxy and Shakespeare were left in the care of Norman, who promised to visit them twice a day and call me with reports. Looking out the porthole at the distant city, I thought about the path I had traveled over the past few months. From a lonely old woman whose existence was defined only by her family's attitude toward her, to a woman who had finally learned to value herself and live life to the fullest on her own terms. There were still many roads ahead, many discoveries, many joys. Maybe my relationship with my son would work out, maybe not. Maybe my grandchildren will grow up and realize the value of a grandmother who doesn't just give gifts, but sets an example of self-respect and inner strength. But no matter what happened next, I knew one thing. At 75, my life was not over. It was just beginning. And it was my choice, my decision, my well-deserved reward for many years of living for others. Now it was my time. And I was going to live it honorably, brightly, and without regrets.